it's just announced that UFC Fight Island is going on in July, and there are going to be tons of people, not tons, but a lot of fighters that will be traveling to Abu Dhabi to deal to have hold the events and fights. So Sherrod's going to help us kind of give a background as to what is needed for athletes to travel, how they travel, and things of that nature. But Sherrod, please first give us a little background about yourself, how you got started practicing in immigration law, and your practice and all of that.
For sure. Yeah, it's been kind of a long road to become an immigration attorney in combat sports. It all started, I'm from Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, where we have a lot of UFC champions, like Kevin Randleman was at Ohio State, and then Mark Coleman. And then from there, I went to law school in Cleveland at Cleveland State. And I just so happened to be two attorneys that mentors of mine that are coaches at Strong Style MMA, of course, where there's Stipe Miocic, Cody Garbrandt at the time, and Jessica Ai. So I've seen all of them since they were amateurs. And I started working with the promoter there called North American Allied Fight Series, which was, that's where I fell in love with MMA, going to the pavilion and just hearing that place shake when it was funny. Stipe was the co-main event of the first event I went to, and the main event was Jessica. I left because I didn't know who she was. But everybody there was actually there for Jessica, and they weren't there for Stipe at the time. But that's how I kind of got introduced to combat sports business. And it just so happened I did some other things for a few years before I decided to start an immigration law practice. And the first call I got was for a boxer, a Nigerian boxer. And that petition actually almost went bad. Oh. But from that success story, I was able to just keep getting calls to being, one of the premier guys that people go to for combat sports visas, probably in the nation right now.
Excellent.
So this is how I'm starting to have a lot more interaction with UFC fighters. The way it usually works is the UFC, and they have a great department that I have a good relationship with, gets the visas for the fighters. It used to be very easy for them to get a P1 visa for any fighter they signed for 3 years.
Okay.
Around maybe 2 years ago, it started when they had a problem with the Brazilian fighters for the Contender Series. And we can get into the nitty-gritty of why that was a problem. But ever since that, it's been harder and harder for them to get the visas. So a lot of times they want the fighter to already have a visa to get an opportunity. And so I've been talking to managers for about 2 years of MMA, some of the best managers in the world, to say, hey, you guys should petition for the visas. That way they hold it for 3 years, and you don't have to worry about if the UFC is getting them visas. Because right now the visas for UFC, they usually only get them for when they need them in the United States. That's why they have to have Fight Island, because they don't have current visas right now. They'd have to go get new ones, and you can't get a new interview. So that's the problem.
Interesting. So it used to be that the UFC would get the visas, but now the UFC is telling the fighters, if you want to fight, or more specifically the managers, if you want your client to fight, you need to get his visa or her visa.
No, it's a little bit more nuanced.
Okay.
They're saying they're kind of staying out because they get visas for athletes in all these countries.
Okay.
Different countries. They're saying we really only prefer to get the visas for athletes if they have fights in the United States.
Gotcha.
And when they do, they're not really getting it for 3 years anymore. They might get it for a couple of months or something like that, just when their actual event is, So that's why when they had Jose Aldo could not get into the country, is because he doesn't have a 3-year P visa anymore. He just gets them per event. So he goes to the consulate office to have an interview, gets a new visa stamped, and then comes. But you can't go, and there's two actually problems. And one is you can't get an interview to get your passport stamped right now. And then what happens too, say even if you did have your passport stamped, but they canceled all the events, they'll say there's no reason for you to come on a P visa for events that are canceled, right? So they denied them at the border. But there's another visa category that I'm switching a lot of UFC fighters to, if their managers listen to me, that it doesn't matter if they have an event lined up or not. And that's the O1 Extraordinary Ability Visa.
Okay, so let's go over the different types of visas that you assist athletes to obtain, so they can go to the United States or another country to fight. So you mentioned the O1 visa. This is
Mhm.
this is the visa that you this is a new type that you would like athletes to obtain, and what, tell us a little bit about it and what's the advantage of it.
Right. So the O1 Extraordinary Ability Visa is reserved for foreign nationals that have risen to the top of their field. And it's much harder to get this visa than a P1, but the difference is it has a much greater work authorization, and it doesn't require you to have an itinerary like events, especially you don't have to prove that you're coming to fight in events that require international athletes. And that's something that we're having a huge problem with in P1 visas for a lot of the sports we work in, because they'll say, well, does this event really need international athletes? And that can be a tough thing to argue. But I have a couple things I do in combat sports, especially boxing, to get past that. But so say if Jose Aldo would have had an O1 visa, he could have came in because that visa category does not require you to have fights that require international participation.
Okay.
You can come for anything. Like you can be coming here to do a movie, write a book, or, you can have a very wide work authorization on that O1. So they can't ask you, are you just coming here to fight?
Okay, so with O1, you don't have to tell them that I'm coming here for UFC 251, that's being held July 11th, and then and then I'm leaving.
Right.
That's not the case. You for O1, is there a specific set amount of time you could stay within the country?
Yeah, so on O1s, we typically get them for 3 years, which is the maximum that you can get them for. And they're extendable up to 10 years.
Okay. And then, so they can, with O1, you can earn money within the country?
Yeah. So say on a P1, you're really only supposed to be doing what you're contracted to do, like fight and maybe get sponsorships.
Okay.
But you're not supposed to be on a P1 coaching. So say a lot of fighters want to come here and then do seminars on a P1, they can get in trouble when they go to renew their visas, especially because they'll say like, hey, you weren't coming here just to fight. I saw that you had some posters about you doing seminars and coaching, but on the O1, you can put all of that type of stuff into your itinerary and not have any problems.
So with the O1, you could do fights, you could make an appearance, you could sign autographs, you could even, I don't know, you could do something where you're realizing money. Whereas P1, you're saying you can only do the specific thing, and if you do anything outside of that, you could be in trouble.
True, and sometimes they're getting more aggressive about that. So in my petitions, I don't refer to practice as practice training, because that's a buzzword that can get your visa denied. I call it exhibitions. They'll be having weekly exhibitions at the gym. And, like I work with athletes at American Top Team and Hard Knocks. So I might put the whole roster of the weight class in that gym saying, this is what they're ranked. These are the people he's practicing with. You cannot put anybody in there because they might die. And sometimes I send statistics of people dying in practice from boxing and MMA, just because we've seen everything. We do so much,
Yeah, no, most definitely. So now let's go back to the P1. So tell us what the P1. This is something that you have been doing, and currently are helping athletes assist.
Yeah.
Hey.
So the P1 is probably the most popular and appropriate visa for athletes, and it doesn't have the same requirements as the O1. The requirements are much more objective. There's about 8 of them, and of them you only have to prove 2. And so just to give you examples of like what the P1 eligibility criterion are, is international rankings. If you've been publicized in reputable media outlets and trade journals, significant awards and achievements. And then there's some that just don't apply to P1s, like have you competed in a major league sports, or have you competed with the NCAA college? Which are 2 categories that an MMA fighter will never have.
Right.
But that's why it's so easy for like basketball players to get visas, because if they've played college and then played in the NBA before, that's 2 categories right there. The problem is this. So it's much easier to get them qualified as an international recognized athlete. The issue is this. You also have to have an itinerary of events that require the participation of internationally recognized athletes. Okay. And that's much harder than you think.
So here's a question that I have here. Then what happens if an athlete gets their fight canceled because they didn't make weight or their opponent didn't make weight? Um, and what is is there an do you have to come up with an explanation why there was not a event there that the athlete attended, or
No,
tell
not in that case. So that's a good question to see, like, okay, so you have a P visa approved and these events and they don't happen. No, that wouldn't be something that creates a problem. Now, what would create a problem is if you created a foul and got your license suspended, and then they can go to the athletic commission website and see that you're suspended for a year or 2 years. And they'll say, well, how can you compete when you've been suspended for doping or suspended for other things like that? That can be an issue.
Does it make it harder if someone is flagged by USADA, an athlete is flagged by USADA, say, they get flagged and then they want to come back and compete again? Is there some issue related to that?
Yeah, so that probably wouldn't come in at the part where you're trying to get a visa approved. When I'm proving their eligibility with USAS, that's not going to be a problem. But where I have experienced that being an issue is when they go pick up their visa at their interview. So even after you get your visa approved, you still, if you're abroad, have to go to an interview at a consular office to get your visa stamped. And then I have a couple athletes that have been put in something that's even worse than a denial, which is something called administrative processing. So usually when you go to your interview, they'll say you're approved or you're denied. And then the third thing they're starting to do is called administrative processing, and the lawyer cannot do anything. This means that they've been flagged for a problem and only this with the State Department, and they have to go do an investigation. And all I can do really is try to get congressional help to go call the office and see what's going on. I have a couple out for about a year, on administrative processing, and there's just really nothing I can do.
So with administrative processing, that means that they've, well, I guess I don't want to jump to conclusions, but there's some issue that either the Department of Homeland Security or the Immigration Services tell you they must investigate further.
They're at least supposed to, but who knows, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, who knows? So they're supposed to give you a reason and then get back to you in a couple of months, but there's just nothing you can do to control how long they take. And like I said, I have two that I've seen for doping. One of them, the guy might have been a little sketchy, so I don't know what he's up to. He might have messed, But the other one, they won't produce what they've been looking at or because if they don't tell you what it is, you can't go and give them more information to try to counteract that and explain. So it's a really tough thing. And I'm actually doing a couple of things with some attorneys around here that do the same type of visa work in different industries to get some media coverage on this, to put more pressure on the congressional folks to help us out.
Okay. So how long does it take to obtain a visa for an athlete to compete? What's the length?
Okay. So there's two ways to go about it. One is regular processing, and there's premium processing, which was gone up until June 8th. So on regular processing, I've seen visas come in 3 days. I've seen visas come in 9 months. There's just no way to control how long it takes. With premium processing, you get 15-day calendar day responses. So whether it's an approval, a denial, or a request for more evidence, they have 15 days to respond to you.
I see. And
that just came back. It's starting to roll back slowly.
Okay. And so what happens if there's a denial? Is there any other appeal process for you to do to help the athlete?
Yeah, so there's a couple options if you get denial. One is you can do a motion to reconsider, which you can just ask them without presenting more evidence, or you can add more evidence to it. And the evidence standards aren't like would be in a courtroom. Or you could litigate. You can litigate in a federal court and sue them, which a lot more immigration attorneys are starting to do. For example, there's a litigation going on right now with the Sabres, the Buffalo Sabres hockey team. because they had a physical conditioning coach that they got denied for a green card. And that's a whole nother issue. Getting coaches in, that's a whole nother issue. That's what the real problem is.
Have you dealt with like corner people or striking coaches or just
Yeah.
corner people? How does that work?
Right. So that's something that's very interesting. I'm glad you asked that because I have two ways to do it. And there's actually a lot of flexibility. One is I can get them their own O1 visa. Coaches don't get P1 visas unless they're with a major league sports team. But this is something I'm helping a lot of MMA management companies with. Is say if they have any athlete that's on a P1, I can get them something called a P1S, which is for the support staff of P1. And this doesn't have to just be coaches, but it could be cheerleaders, nutritionists. I've gotten parents in as, like logistics managers, but it doesn't come with any work authorization other than accompanying that fighter or that athlete to what they're doing. But it's a much smaller eligibility requirement. I just have to show that you play an essential part to his performance. You have some type of criteria to do it, and whatever you're doing is not readily done by a United States person.
Gotcha. I see. And so, just out of curiosity, I know before all of this pandemic hit, I know Khabib Nurmagomedov, he had indicated that he wanted his father to see him, and his father couldn't because his father couldn't travel to the United States. Would they? I mean, I don't know if you had helped, and you don't have to tell me right here.
Yeah.
But would something like a P1S be something that Khabib's father could have obtained?
Okay, so I don't know what happened, but I can kind of surmise is he probably has something. He probably got put in like administrative processing, or has something to where he's been denied in his past.
Okay.
So he's probably can get approved for a P1S or an O1 even as when everybody knows who he is. He can get an O1 visa, but the problem is he probably can't get his passport stamp to come here, whether it be from a crime or associated with people that the State Department doesn't like and stuff like that.
Okay, and again, one of the things, and I don't practice immigration law, but in the past, I've knew immigration lawyers. The one thing I've always thought about immigration law is it's so hard because working with either the Department of Homeland Security or Immigration Services, there's a lot that they don't tell you. I don't know if you can concur with that, but there's a lot of information that you feel like you're not obtaining that you could use.
Yeah, it's kind of like playing a game with no boundaries, like a football field that doesn't have any lines sometimes, right. Especially now. I'll put it like this. So when I started doing this, I could put out a P visa petition with 30 pages of evidence. I'm now putting petitions out with 500 to 600 pages of evidence, just because I'm anticipating everything that I've ever seen anytime. Because it's important to me, especially as a small law firm, that we don't take losses. And, I probably say our success rate is, well above 90%. And even on the ones that, the couple that I can probably count on my hand that didn't go through, what I tell them is like, I'll go for your case at cost until we get something, Yeah. So that's how we do it at our firm. But they are like making stuff up like all the time. And that's what the problem is. And so say like you submit a petition and then they give you what's called a request for evidence where they ask more things. You can only really respond to what they asked you. If they go then and deny it for some other details that they didn't even notify you about at first, that's a problem. And we need to get some litigation. Probably somebody needs to go litigate that and see it all the way through to a decision that whatever you put in a request for evidence is the only thing that we have to respond to. I actually know a very good lawyer that does esports in Los Angeles, Jenny Doy. She's tremendous. Matter of fact, she won the Sports Immigration Lawyers Award of the Year. I know it's crazy that we even have enough people to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she litigated an esports case where she was arguing that you can't put extra things into the RFE. To the denial that you didn't ask in the RFE. But here's what happens is they settle the case and then just give you an approval rather than let that go through litigation and get settled as law.
rather
right? So
than
somebody just needs to really see that through, and hopefully something will happen with the Buffalo Sabres case, because the same thing is going on.
Interesting. So we went over the O1 and the P1. Is there any other visas that you help athletes get into the country?
So I guess the other ones I'd mention are the visitor visa is technically acceptable to get a visitor visa and do competitions that are only for prize money. That can be done. It's not recommended because it's, if you have some sponsors on your back or something like that, you could be trouble. But say if you just came with blank shorts, fought, and just left, you'd be fine on a visitor visa for prize money.
Would you be okay if you're doing the Reebok deal?
No.
No. Okay.
No, you definitely wouldn't, because that's a United States company. You can't even say you were being paid by a sponsor in Canada. And the other problem is show. So if you have show money, that's kind of not prize money. So it doesn't really work. The other visas that I do are for the coaches or even training partners. So say if managed company X wants to just get somebody here in the country and they're like 6-0 and not a lot going on, I can get them a P1S just like I would do a coach as an essential sparring partner. And then the green card category that we do for fighters is the EB1A. Yeah. And it's basically the same criteria as the O1, but much more souped up. And we actually have a couple UFC fighters that we're working on EB1As now. But the thing is, they got to decide whether they want to fight here or in Fight Island, because you usually want to stay out of the country or in the country while you're waiting for your EB1A green card to process.
Okay. All right. So now we talked a little bit about Fight Island now. So what happens as American citizens trying to fight on Fight Island? We know Max Holloway is going to be there. We know Kamaru Usman's going to be there. What's the travel restrictions? How does that all work? What do you advise your athletes about obtaining a visa to go to?
Right. Okay. So you're in good shape if you have a U.S. passport or if you have a passport with a visa already stamped.
Okay.
That means you're at least clear to come in. Now, the thing to look at is your pathway to getting in and out of that country that you're going to. Because if you go into one of the areas that are on the travel ban list, that is what might stop you from coming in or makes you subject to a quarantine when you get back. And those are the countries like Ireland and the Schengen countries and stuff like that. So if you go to Abu Dhabi or wherever they are, as long as you don't go through those paths in those airports, maybe that those countries that are listed in the travel ban, you should be fine to get in and out.
Okay.
Whether you have a visa that's already stamped or you have a U.S. passport.
And so before I got on here, there was a Brett Okamoto tweet that said that American athletes that are heading over to Abu Dhabi would be going through correct city. So as you're saying that there would be no issues with athletes having being stopped. But what about someone like a Conor McGregor who, assuming he's not retired, and he's going to be fighting on Fight Island, and he's coming from Ireland, which is one of the countries you had indicated. How would he be able to get to Fight Island?
Right. So that would probably depend a lot on the UAE's kind of their own customs and borders patrol, for what they think about going over there. I mean, I'm sure they have the same information as everybody else that Ireland is probably not doing too well with the COVID. And then also, that's a pretty conservative country, and Conor has a lot of, fouls on the book. Yeah. Sometimes I'm surprised that he's able to get here because, what I said, why Khabib's father could not get in is probably because he has stuff that prevents him from getting his passport stamped, even with a waiver. So there's two things that Conor has to worry about. He has to worry about COVID exposure, being from Ireland, and then also some countries he might have a hard time getting work authorization. But I imagine UAE, they have a great relationship with the UFC, so they can work that out. But I bet they have to work pretty hard to get Conor here in the United States anyway.
Right.
you know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, but I
He
assume.
probably has a multi-year, so he probably already has a passport stamp. Maybe that's what it is, and it's just never got revoked. So that's one thing. So if it's a big star, maybe they do go ahead and get you. For all I know, he might already have an O1 because he comes here to do so many things.
Right.
And so if he has a 3-year O1, he wouldn't have to go to the interview every time he comes to the United States. He would just have to make sure his visa doesn't get revoked, physically taken away from him. But so say if you have a valid work visa here in the United States and you get a drunk driving, they might come and say, hey, your visa's revoked, but it only really comes into play when you need to go pick another one up,
So I assume then, and we might be going off the tracks a little bit, but it is interesting. So, if you recall back at in Brooklyn when Conor McGregor, like 2 days when his friend was accosted by Khabib, and then him and the rest of his crew flew across to come and confront Khabib, and he threw the guardrail into the bus, and then he was arrested in New York. No issue, no implications with immigration. No issues as far as news reports.
There's almost no way that there wasn't a problem either right then or, like I said, maybe later down the road if he has to renew, right? Because what'll come and happen is usually Customs and Border Control will come and say, gives you a letter, say hey, your visa's been revoked, and we've notified the State Department. But if your passport is stamped, then you can come in because you don't have to go to an interview. You don't have to go to another consular office. You're just showing up at the regular kind of processing for CBP, and you might be fine. Now, there is a way to do a waiver. You can apply for a waiver despite the fact that you have criminal activities, what's called a 212D3 waiver, which is at their discretion. So I imagine that the UFC did have to go and hire somebody good to do some work to make sure that his access stayed intact. But it's almost impossible that he hasn't had to do something. It's just nothing happened.
Yeah.
Because those are serious charges. Those are serious charges.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I assume that the UFC worked its magic because he did come back and fight Donald Cerrone in Vegas. We heard no issues regarding any immigration. His ability to get into the country seemed fine.
I'd imagine that one probably went to the congressional level where they got their best lobbyists to talk to whoever was necessary to get that message to the State Department.
Gotcha. And so as far as the athletes coming back from Abu Dhabi, will there be any issues regarding that, assuming they get on the correct plane and not having to get through the banned cities or anything like that?
No, they should be fine. If they get a good flight, they should be fine. No issues.
Excellent. And so give us a little status if you know. I mean, you're following immigration news as well. Is there any movement as far as how travel will go, travel restrictions, visa issues, things like that? With the state of our world, it's kind of up in the air, but just from the practitioner's point of view, what are you seeing now, and do you see any light at the end of the tunnel as far as the immigration practice?
Yeah, I'm trying to think where to start. I'll start here.
Okay.
Just on, we had a call with the Sports Lawyers Association maybe about a week ago with some immigration lawyers are on there, and there's some crazy things being whispered. Hopefully this won't affect the P and O. Usually the P and O visas are affected last. And we know there's a good trend because there's already been some travel ban exceptions put in place for major league sports.
Right.
If you don't know, the president said, okay, we're working with the NBA, NHL, NFL, and USTA to get them exemptions for people that are in countries that are banned, restricted from travel. He didn't mention MMA yet, but some of the things I'm hearing is that they're going to raise the filing fees for H-1B visas to $50,000.
Wow.
And right now they're I think the total is $3,000.
So that's wow. So from $3,000 to $50,000.
Yes. Yes.
How does
I'm noticing at the practitioner level that the officers are either not trained or they're being very aggressive. Sometimes it's just hard to, it's hard to tell if they don't know what they're doing or if they know exactly what they're doing from the stuff that we're seeing. But there is more. It's hard to get visas right now cleanly through without having a request for evidence battle. But we'll see. We like I said, our petitions get bigger every day. The more questions that we get, and so the good immigration attorneys are only getting better. But for fighters that are looking to come in, is definitely a time to do your research and find somebody that regularly does PVs, because being in the kind of community that everybody speaks to each other that does sports, immigration and different sports, will find that there's only a few people that really do this every day. It took me a long time to be the guy that people call when they need a P visa for sports. It just didn't happen overnight. It happened from experience. And so that's why my petitions are so big. But if you just go to Joe Smo that does deportation defense right now and try to put in a P1, I'll probably be getting a call from that attorney.
Well, so the request for more evidence and things like that, how much does that extend the application process then?
Right. So if there's no premium processing, that can mean another 9 months. And for certain countries, they seem to take longer than others. Like I know petitions in South Africa seem to take forever, and petitions for Indian nationals seem to take forever. Some of the other stuff, not so much, and so it's tough. We always try to get it through the first, that first wave, right, especially if it doesn't have premium processing. If there's premium processing, it's not as big as a deal because you get that 15-day response after you reply to that request for evidence. So it's not as bad a thing.
Now, again, is that coming back, or you said that's slowly being processed back, the premium processing?
All right. Yeah. So to break that down, so it came back on June 8th for petitions that were filed before June 8th. Okay. The next one is June 22nd. So petitions that are filed before June 22nd, I can add premium processing on June 22nd. So we'll probably have to put out another kind of memo to the industry, let them know like, hey, if you guys want to have access to premium processing, let me know now so I can get a petition in before the 22nd for you. So it's not necessarily bad for me. So it means everybody's looking for me.
Excellent.
Yeah, but we'll see. We've got a long line. We're doing a lot of visas, man. It's great. It's great, but it's tough.
So tell us where if an athlete is watching this right now, tell them where they could find you. Sherrod Sports Visas. Give us a web.
So I'm always on Instagram putting out content. So it's Sherrod Sports Visas for Instagram, and SherrodSportsVisas.com is the best way to get in contact with me. Usually, what I do is somebody says, "Am I eligible?" I'll send you a link. We have it in English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Russian. And I'll probably have Arabic soon. And they just fill that out. And then I can go back and look at their qualifications and not waste their time. It's like, sir, you got to do a lot more. Or I'd say, okay, cool. And that's what keeps it efficient and keeps us accurate with saying if you're likely to be successful.
Excellent. Sherrod Seward, thank you so much for your time on here on the interview. Once again, if you're looking for an immigration attorney, we just interviewed the best one.
All right, thank you, Jason.
Have a good day, Sherrod.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.